Shalom Naid Nayot. Mazel Tov. Happy Hanukkah. Welcome back, my dear viewer, my good friend. Um, it's this special time of year, in spite of all the darkness we've been going through together. We must remain the light of the nation, of the worlds, of the worlds. So, um, today's show, we're going to be focusing on why it is the best idea in the world that the U.S. has decided to go to war with Venezuela. Um, just maybe, just 2 days before this Epstein hoax exploded all over everybody's face. Shalom. Mazel. We're going to talk about the greatest threat to America and the West as we know it, Iran, and the Islamification of the West. We can't trust a single Muslim, no matter how hard we look into their human eyes and human soul and human flesh and human heart. It's evil. We're going to be talking about the global rise of anti-Semitism in the wake of October 7th. The most disgusting, horrific failure of security that has ever been known to man. And finally, we are going to talk about a true American hero. Barry Weiss, the new editor-in-chief of CBS. God bless you, Barry. Psych! Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila. The date is December 19th, 2025. This is your news tonight. With your host, Gilbert Chavez. Seriously, guys, no disrespect, no disrespect. Happy holidays to everybody. I'm just a silly guy. That's all it is. We are going to talk about the Jews today. I'm going to do a disclaimer here up front before I open my mouth about anything else, that there is such a thing as anti-Semitic tropes. And that's just a synonym for stereotypes. It's like saying Mexicans have 14 kids, or black people really enjoy fried chicken. Anybody can have 14 kids. Anybody can really enjoy fried chicken. You're not really saying anything. You're just using a tired generalization, right? So tired generalizations for Jewish people would be that they're cheap, right? Or that they poison the wells, right? They make people sick on purpose. That they collude with each other, that there's a conspiracy amongst them, and that they control the media, right? They control Hollywood. There's also the anti-Semitic trope that they drink the blood of children, or goyim. And goyim in the Jewish religion would be anybody who's not Jewish. The disclaimer up front is that I'm not leaning into those anti-Semitic tropes. We're going into the history, the facts, what is written about people who lived and people who lived around those people who lived at the times. History that is kind of, ignored, looked down on, forgotten for the intents and purposes of fulfilling an agenda or covering up stuff that would get in the way of a narrative, right? So there you go, right? There's the I'm not gonna I'm not and that's not what this episode is for, to do all that, right? And I guess like the best way to understand like what the Jewish people have going on, I found, because this whole understanding of what it is to be Jewish and why is such an important topic of conversation in modern day America. It's purposefully complex, just like anything that the existing power structure doesn't want you to know about. It's purposefully complex. You're not gonna get it right away first time you look at it. But what I will say, of the three major Abrahamic faiths, which are faiths based on the notion that the monotheistic God of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam made a covenant with one man about 1800 years before the Common Era, or before Christ was born. This man's name was Abraham. He told Abraham to kill his son to test his faith. And God said, Abraham, trust in me. I'm God. Kill your son. And Abraham was like, well, I mean, he's God. What do I know, right? So he was going to do it. And then God said, psych, you just proved that you're just super loyal. So yes, your progeny, your future generations are going to be my people forever. And that's basically the start of the Abrahamic faiths or whatever. But it gets really complicated. And what I was going to say is, like, I broke it up into anime arcs, as super like autistic and nerdy, dorky as that is. I It was the best way to understand. So there's like the pre-Jesus arc. Then there's like the Jesus and going forward arc, like the hidden histories. And after the hidden histories, we have modern history. So the pre-Jesus arc is really the, like, if I were to go straight tinfoil hat into all of this, I've read books where, the alien species that came to Earth thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, and caused the downfall of Atlantis. Their race was named Hebrew. I've read, like, it's who like, if such things occurred in our past and there were such beings, like, there's no telling what truly transpired, right? So I'm just telling you what I've read. But as far as like accepted facts and timelines go, right here after Abraham is chosen by God, he has two sons, right? Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac is the one that ends up birthing Judaism and Christianity, and Ishmael later births Islam. So the thing about like the historical accuracy of the Bible is it's not really there, and a lot of people would laugh you out of like a legitimate conversation about history if you were to cite the Bible. The thing about the Bible is that it was written. I actually don't know how much of the Jesus Christ. Well, um, uh, yeah. So Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael. Isaac gave birth to Jacob and Esau, and Jacob tricked Esau out of his birthright. Jacob became the father of the Israelites, right? They changed Jacob's name to Israel, and he had 12 sons, and these were the 12 tribes of Israel. Super speed run, right? So, um, this is all like 2000 BC, 1600 BC, right? And the the 12 the 12 children of Jacob, 11 of them looked down on their littlest younger brother Joseph. They uh they sold him into slavery in Egypt, and they were settled in the land what is known as Palestine, right? Now Israel. It was originally settled by the Canaanites, which, I mean, who the fuck knows who they were? Phoenicians. Uh, their ancestors were ancient hominids or Atlanteans. Who knows, man? Who knows? But we're going based off of what is known. So, uh, basically, the story of Israel as we know it was written by somebody who wasn't even necessarily a blood right inheritor um, of Israel, of the tribe of Israel, because eventually you get you get this guy David, King David, who is the famous patriarch of what we could consider Judea and Samaria, what Israel feels like they have a right to in modern day. He wrote the Bible. He wrote the Torah, the Old Testament. His scribes or whatever, they wrote it to legitimize his claim to the kingdom of Israel, which was not like an extensive empire or anything. It was a collection of tribes. They in the Bible they made it seem like a really strong empire, like the Ottoman Empire, almost like that. And that's kind of what drives a lot of like Zionists, which are like the political Jewish extremists, to sum it up succinctly, I guess. That's what they pined for, that kingdom of David, and it didn't even exist. It was literally a group of tribes who lived in one section of Israel. They didn't. It wasn't an entire landscape of an empire. It wasn't an empire.
Most of the Jerusalem Jews were part of an ultra-Orthodox community of the sort that the Zionists were rebelling against. A community that lived on donations and did not have the kind of productive life that the Zionist revolution aspired to. It is no wonder, then, that the Zionists preferred to build the new Hebrew city in the golden sands of Tel Aviv. Most of the immigrants to Israel, about 80%, settled along the Mediterranean coast, a region that had never been the historic homeland of the Jewish people.
And I guess before we get to King David, in the Bible, how it's written, after Jacob has his 12 sons, 11 of them send the weakest brother into slavery into Egypt. He ends up becoming the second most powerful man in Egypt, while the other 11 are fall into famine in Israel. They end up going, their father Jacob, Israel, sends them into Egypt to look for food, and they find out that their brother they sold into slavery is this really powerful man. And Joseph cuts them some slack, and the entire tribe of Israel ends up moving to Egypt, and it becomes millions strong. And over time, though the Egyptians were like friendly with the Jews, I guess they just changed their mind or whatever, how that happens. And historically, archaeologically, there is no evidence at all of Moses or the Jews living in Egypt, or um, going through the desert. Um, this is just in the Torah, in the Old Testament, and what Jews believe happened. So the Pharaoh ended up persecuting the Jews or whatever, right? Killing the firstborn son because of all the Jewish family, because it was prophecy that Moses would save the Jewish people, overthrow the Pharaoh, whatever. He leads them through the desert, splits the Red Sea, which this in other esoteric interpretations of the Bible, it's kind of just like managing the chaos of the world and your emotions and getting to the promised land, which is like the sanctity of that piece of God inside yourself, which was promised to you, the promised land, Israel. So it's your birthright, right? So they get out of Egypt. Moses gets the 10 Commandments, and when he comes down from getting the 10 Commandments, the Israelites are worshiping a false idol. They built a golden calf to represent God, and that really pissed God off. Like God, I guess that was one of the commandments that he told Moses. First off, he was like, "Please do not physically represent me in the realm of man. You can't. It's impossible." And yeah, he got down off the mountain, Mount Sinai, and that's exactly what they were doing. So he made them wander the desert for 40 years. There's like that was in like 1400 BC, 1200 BC. And I was going to play a clip of Ken Beagle-Eisen, the creator of the series. Whoever you thought you were a Jew. Kind of just condenses what I'm explaining, and he also connects the birth of the Eastern religions to the fall of this kingdom of Israel that David was the ruler of.
There we go. Hardly any room for me. This is a timeline of religious history. It runs from 1800 BC, the time of Abraham, and it goes up to 600 AD, the time of Muhammad. That's a span of 24 centuries. What's the chances that all the Oriental religions in the whole world, represented here by Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Hinduism, at least Hinduism in its current form, Zoroastrianism and Jainism, what's the chances that all those religions would pop up in the same century? There's no chance. The chances are astronomically small. The fact that the whole of Oriental religion popped up in a single century is an extraordinary coincidence. Absolutely extraordinary. And it happened in the same century that the Jews, the diaspora, the Jews were kicked out of Israel and the Jewish nation came to an end.
And he blames it on the consistent angering of God by the Israelites. God gives the Israelites these commandments, these rules to live by, and they consistently try to find loopholes through, or disregard God's will for their own benefit, for their own sake, or whatever. And this just pisses God off like a bunch of times. So by the time King David comes around, his son King Solomon is also world renowned, apparently. What I've looked into as far as esoterically, the occult stuff having to do with Solomon, he got heavily into magic, Babylonian magic. The Babylonians is the area of east of where Israel and Palestine are. And I guess like one example of like this magic that exists today, like you can even see it, is the symbol on the seal of the flag of Israel, which is known as the seal of Solomon. It's an upward triangle and a downward triangle interlinked, and these are symbols of the elements, and also symbols of the male and female bodies or whatever. The spear and the cup. So combining them is like an alchemical. It's like an alchemical. It's like an alchemical statement. It's like the union of the elements to create the fifth element, the spirit, which is where God resides, the realm in which where God resides, which is not really like it's not kosher, no pun intended. It's not what God was teaching. God wasn't teaching alchemy. He was teaching the law, you know. And we'll come back to the flag of Israel if I don't forget, you know. So we got Solomon, right? And in the Bible, and what Ken Beagleisen says is that the thing that angered God about Solomon is when he got old, he had all these wives, and they practiced different religions. They were pagans, idol worshippers, and they wanted to practice their religion in Israel, which was forbidden. But in his old age, he kind of just said, "You know what? I don't care. Go for it." And that would go with the mentality of somebody who had long been dabbling in magic and getting like results from it. He's like, "Yeah, what do I mean, God's on my side, right?" So, shortly after this, when he died, this kingdom of Israel fell and split into two parts, both of which were like blasphemous and like sinning and gambling and sex ridden and all this other stuff. So, in the Bible, God made Israel fall. Like this is where the Jewish diaspora comes from, which is what basically he gave the northern kingdom to Assyria, which is Syria today, and the southern kingdom to the southern kingdom to Babylon. And there's always a saying that the Jews were taken to Babylon in chains because there's this recurring history of Jews being slaves. I think it's 500 BC at this time, 580 BC at this time, and there's some scholars who maintain that the diaspora wasn't as dramatic as they made it seem. I think the people that were taken to Babylon were the high priest, the Jewish high priest of the Jewish families or whatever, and there were, I guess, possibly, I think, well, not that I think, it's genetically proven that like Jews ended up in Africa and Spain, and eventually, I guess, even further east as well. So the diaspora happened, whether or not it was all 3 million Jews or however many Jews that were dispersed from southern and northern Israel. And some Jews got to stay as well in Israel, or what was known as Israel and Palestine, right? So, one of the main tenets of Judaism is that they're waiting for the Messiah to return, because it was prophesied that the Messiah would come and save them, take the Jews back to Israel, and establish a temple. And I think they already had a temple there for Solomon, but it had been destroyed in one of the invasions. So I want to say maybe 30, 40 years after the diaspora actually began, there was this guy, King Cyrus. he basically let the Jews back into Israel, let them rebuild the temple, and a lot of the Jews consider this guy their Messiah. And it was crazy because even when the Jews that got there started building the temple, the Jews that had lived there already and weren't affected by the diaspora, they had used the Bible and the Torah to breed discontent between these two groups of Jews who were the same people. They believed the same things and came from the same place, but were being used against each other by a higher power structure. And we'll see this recur throughout history. So, once they rebuild the second temple, there's from that year 500 BC until Jesus is born, there are no prophets. There are like Moses and Noah and Abraham. No, there weren't any more who claim to have been channeling God or speaking through God, or God speaking through them, right? So then Jesus is born in Bethlehem, apparently. And at this time, the Jewish church was being led by those high priests who came back from Babylon, and they preached one thing but did another. And that other thing that they did it was magic, right? So, I guess at some point it's prophesied that Jesus had come, so they want to kill all the firstborn again. And Jesus, Joseph, and Mary end up escaping to Egypt for his adolescence. I recently watched a video about a rabbi kind of explaining the Jewish standpoint, their beliefs. And he said basically,
it's not so cut and dry. In Judaism, there are different levels of rabbi. We can sort of compare it to baseball. You have single A, double A, triple A, and then you have the major leagues, you have a platoon player, you have an all-star, and you have a superstar. So we have 6 levels. Okay? Now, typically, in the mainstream, a individual who is going to become a rabbi and have other people recognize their status will go to a series of schools and education and pass tests within an institution, and the institution typically will grant that person a title. But just because you got a title doesn't mean people are going to value your opinion. Here we get to the single, double, triple A, and the majors. What do I mean? The way that you become an authority in Judaism is typically by demonstrating, typically in writing, your intellectual command of Judaic material, and by providing unusual qualitative dissertations on topics where people read what you have, and it's like, wow, that is so amazing. So what happens is you have different levels of what I just described. And as a result of peer review, which then once a certain group of peers says, well, this guy, he's above us. We can't compete. Look at his command of the Talmud, of the codes, and his creativity in applying them in a compelling, logical way. Typically, we don't do things based on belief as much as we do based on compelling logic. And when people can look at our material all the way back to the 5 books of Moses and demonstrate a logical process where they reach a 21st century conclusion, and once again, they lay it out for you, you can attack every part. If as a result of your attempts to attack, you've failed, you bow to that person because they've demonstrated intellectual superiority. Wow.
Rabbis kind of go based off of who has the best ideas. And it was like it's an anti-Semitic trope to even say that, but it's coming from a rabbi himself. And I could probably play that clip if I can find it. So, I guess before we continue, I was going to go into this later, but I could stop right now and do this. So just so you know, there's 3 major texts in the Jewish religion. The Torah, which is based on the Old Testament. It has the 10 Commandments in it, right? It's everything that happened in the Bible from Adam and Eve to, I guess, the destruction of the Second Temple, right? And from there, since that time, the Jews have been waiting for the Messiah, even though their Savior, even though several people, including Jesus, have come forward saying that they're Messiah, they're the Messiah. That's the Torah. That's supposed to be the main tenet of Judaism. So you have that. Then you have the Talmud, and there's apparently 2 Talmuds. But what the Talmud is like commentary on the Torah. Throughout the thousands, the now 3,000, something like that years since its beginning, I guess, since they've had recorded documents of the Torah, there's been like rabbis who do their commentary on the Torah as well. And the Talmud is frequently used in quote-unquote anti-Semitic conspiracy theories to make Jews look bad and monstrous even at times. And when you bring up some of these like thoughts, it's basically looking at like an archive of tweets from rabbis, right? Like throughout the thousands of years, and what they thought about the Torah and other rabbis' thoughts, and basically like what this rabbi that I had listened to talk, what he basically described it as is like a thousands of years long conversation between the rabbis and commentary on Jewish law. And you know, there's very, 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 people who don't. Okay, so even in one of the things of the Talmud, some of the rabbis believe that to study the Torah and the Talmud as a non-Jew, it should be punishable by death. And then if you were to bring up that fact, it would be like, well, you're only bringing that up because you're anti-Semitic. No, well, a rabbi said it, so why is that in there? Like, why is that in there, but why are we not allowed to talk about it? And how do you feel about that? You get what I'm saying? So, and I guess in a modern day Jew would probably be like, well, obviously it's wrong to kill people, you know? And obviously it is wrong to kill people. Obviously. So besides the Torah and the Talmud, which if you really want to see some crazy shit, go look in the Talmud. There's the Zohar. And the Zohar is the Kabbalistic Jewish mysticism teachings, which comes from that Babylonian magic, which probably even comes from further back than that in Egypt, you know. And it's like basically, it's been described as Jewish high priest as like a blueprint and system of studying the soul and consciousness. It's like a map for the soul to follow on the path to God. And this is thousands of years old, and they practice it and study these ideas. So like, there has to be something behind it. But I have listened to discussions on it and explanations of it, but it's very, 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 very like it's obtuse for me. Like I get it. I get there's like a refinement that you might put your soul and consciousness through on the way, basically like meditation and enlightenment, right? But I don't know, it's esoteric for sure. And the Zohar is that it's these like you could call it magic, but I mean, I don't know if y'all saw that clip I played on my story, but I could play it here again, right?
Recently passed away. All is one of the books.
So how did you like learn of this though?
Again, through other members.
Okay. And you don't want to get into the ritual at all? Like, so you're laying someone, who are these bodies that you're putting on the mat?
Through the book, but I suggest if you have a chance, describes different types of rituals and things of that.
You mentioned when we talked on the phone, like, and So you're laying someone.
Right, they're already dead.
Oh.
And then
You missed that part, Tony?
I didn't know if there were people sacrificing their lives or
No,
something.
not sacrificing their lives. They died of natural causes or whatever.
Oh.
And before you bury them in a cemetery, you basically bring them down
Into the tunnel.
for a ritual. That's it. It's more like it's not something spoken about, okay? But you could understand, just like other.
So yeah, doing a ritual around a dead body, like I mean, like a ceremony is one thing. Is a ceremony a ritual? We say goodbye to like the case, the soul isn't there anymore. We put it in the ground or whatever the case may be. What's so different than like doing chants around a dead body? But I guess the different thing would be trying to put a soul back into that body, right? So. And it's strange because like resurrection is something Jesus did, but he did it through God because he was God's son. That's what we're led to believe in Christianity, right? So by the time Jesus is born, he's like a rebel and comes of age. He's a rebel in Judaism. He's a rebel to the church because with the Zohar and Kabbalistic beliefs and just how Judaism was at that point, it was basically like only the rabbis and the most studious among those rabbis were worthy of God's salvation and his love and his works and his glory. And the rest of us were kind of just like, well, you really, really have to work at it, or you really, really have to devote yourself. And it's not unless these Jewish high priests, which were known as the Pharisees, right? It's not unless these Jewish high priests approve your divinity or approve that God approves of you, that you are chosen by God. So Jesus, I guess, just the story of Jesus, he just didn't agree with that, and he believed that everybody was God's children, and everybody would be saved if they could recognize that. And he spoke out against the Jews who followed God because he said, you deny God by holding on to your traditions. You know, like the Old Testament has been fulfilled. The old law has been fulfilled, and this is the new law. You know, like it's season 3, guys. Come on, like we're not doing this shit anymore. And I guess like the rabbi that I keep bringing up, he says like there's no way that the Jews had anything to do with Jesus' death, because if they had a problem with one of their own, which Jesus was, and it's against the Torah to kill another Jew, right? Like, or just kill in general, but kill another Jew you just don't do. If they did find him guilty in the court of Jewish law, they would stone him to death. They wouldn't have gone the roundabout way of getting the Romans to do it, I guess. But yeah, there was 3 types of like Jewish priests at the time: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. I'll try and put like definitions. I can't off the top of my head or whatever, but well, a lot of the argument in Judaism today is like you can't have Christianity without Judaism because Jesus was a Jew. And he did follow Passover, and he you look, it's like when you're in Rome, you do as the Romans do. And I'm not sure if I have to check if that's a quote in the Bible. I'm showing my stupidity right now. But basically, it's the year fucking 20, right? You can't be like a far out hippie and be like, yo, bro, all of religion, you're just a fucking heretic. Then you're like a witch, basically. And like at the time, right, that's what they would consider you. The thing is like the concept of like one supreme God above even the machinations of our mind, or the forces that exist within this realm that we would assign to the nature of God. God is above even that. Like the creator of the unseen, like of all things. And it would be a hard concept to grasp, I guess, in a time where everybody's God was competing for supremacy. And there wasn't so much understanding, you know. But that even, I guess, sounds like the modern day. It doesn't sound like too much has changed, honestly. But after Jesus died, he did. I'm not sure if he prophesied the destruction of the second temple, but the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, and this caused a crisis in the Jewish faith. Jesus died, you know, and they've spent a long time since then waiting for the Messiah. I think at this point, there are certain Jewish historians who agree that Judaism as it exists today is not what it was back then. You know, because after Jesus died and they had that crisis of faith, it became something else entirely. I mean, back then, like, the Jews believed, like, if you sinned, you killed a chicken and, like, you burn it in front of your house to repent or whatever. So, it went more from sacrificial worship to like a rabbinic order. They follow the teachings of the rabbis and go to synagogue rather than like do sacrifices. That's our current understanding, right? That's the accepted understanding. But old habits die hard. What is considered one of the great catastrophes of Judaism would be somebody else that Candace Owens claims half of the world's Jewry at the time believed was their Messiah in 1666. 1,500 years. That's a lot of time. And I guess right before we get into that, right, we can talk about what is considered an anti-Semitic conspiracy called the Khazars.
These mountains, unfortunately for their plans, they encountered an army of fierce barbarians called the Khazars, or the Khuzari. Since most Americans can't pronounce the guttural Khazar, I'll pronounce that name the way it's spelled in English. Khazar. The Khazars beat back the Muslims in a series of bloody wars involving armies as large as 200 to 300,000 men on each side. These wars went on for over 100 years. Finally, in AD 737, the Arab invasions petered out and peace prevailed. At that point, Bulan, the king of the Khazars, decided that he wanted to have a religion too. There's an amusing story about what happened next. According to legend, King Bulan invited a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim to his court. Each of the three gave a strong pitch for his own religion, and Bulan couldn't decide which one to choose. So he sent all three out. Then he called back the Christian by himself. He said, "I've decided not to become a Christian, but which one of these other two religions should I choose?" Without hesitation, the Christian began ranting and railing against Islam and said, "If you can't be a Christian, then without a doubt, be a Jew." Then King Bulan sent out the Christian and called in the Muslim. A similar scene transpired. The Muslim began ranting and railing against Christianity. Then he said, "If you can't be a Muslim, then without a doubt, be a Jew." Well, that settled things for King Bulan. In effect, all three were telling him the same thing, be a Jew. So he converted. This extraordinary conversion took place in AD 740. Subsequently, for 500 years, Russia was a Jewish nation. If you don't believe it, look it up in any encyclopedia. The Khazars were the supreme masters of all Russia, from the Ural Mountains all the way into parts of Poland, Hungary, Austria, and the Czech Republic. Then a terrible thing happened. The Vikings invaded.
The Khazars lived in the area between the Middle East and Russia, kind of like Ukraine, right? In the like 700s. This is after like Islam was established as a religion, which there are people who believe that Islam was a further fulfillment of Jewish law, that he was actually the Messiah too after Jesus, which, I mean, yeah, sure, who knows, bro, right? But the Khazars, they're like the early Russians, right? There's like, I listened to 2 nearly 3-hour discussions about the Khazars. It's accepted that the Khazars existed. Maybe it's kind of like lost in time that they converted to Judaism, but they mass converted to Judaism. And this is basically where the Eastern European Jews at the time come from. Yes, there were Jews in the diaspora that ended up all across the world, like I said, in Europe, in Africa, in the East. But there's also a considerable amount of Jews that came from this whole group of basically Russians that converted into Jews. And that's where they stayed, right? In Eastern Europe. So 1666. And in those discussions about the Khazars, it said that they're brutal warmongering bandits, the type of like people that would like invite travelers into their home, get them drunk, tell them their whole story, and then take their lives, and literally kill them, and then go live in the town that they came from as them. Costume changes, right? So fast forward from the year 700, like almost 1,000 years, you have one of the great catastrophes of Judaism, Sabbatai Zevi, where half of the world's Jewry was convinced that he was their Messiah. He lived a life. He lived a man's life, and then he apparently reincarnated into this guy Jacob Frank. And they both believed in this thing that, like I said, that I view as evil, the inversion of good things.
People should read is Sigmund Freud and the Jewish mystical tradition. Sigmund Freud came from a Sabbatian family. This is Jewish mysticism. It actually has nothing to do with the Torah. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Old Law. In fact, they said the Old Law was fulfilled, and they believed that this man, Sabbatai Zevi, was their Messiah. They've virtually wiped this man from history, even though half of the world Jewry followed him, believed he was the Messiah. He was a homosexual psychopath who believed in practicing incest as a sacrament. This is how they were going to move forward in the world. And this was they worshipped the Kabbalah. Their high book is the Zohar. Thank you. It was like the Zohar. And they believe that you rape your kids when they're 7, but you don't tell them why they're raped until they're 35. Now, this is an inversion of, some people tell me, of the mystic tradition. It's kind of from the Book of the Dead in Egypt, really. But they rape their kids, and Sigmund Freud discovered that the reason that they do this is Sigmund Freud's work, is because it conditions the child to grow up to be a psychopath because of what they have to go through trying to understand why their parents did this. This is all real. This is not, all of these authors are Jewish. They support the Jewish movement. The second author, David Bakan, I think actually regrets writing his book because he thought it was going to be this like expose of, why the Jews in Europe should be sympathized for. And then people went, wait, what's going on here? Like, there's all this incestuous rape happening, and I think this is actually the reason, and I encourage Jewish people to read this book as well. I don't think they know their own history, because at this time there was a great schism. There were actual Jews who were following the Torah to the letter of the law, who were getting kicked out of countries because of these Sabbatian Frankists who were actually raping kids. And there's nothing new under the sun, right? So their instinct is to go, why am I being kicked out of a country? What did I do, right? I had nothing to do with this. These are anti-Semitic tropes. And yet these people were funded by the richest people in the world. Jacob Frank was given a castle in Germany, in Offenbach, Germany. He was made a baron. By the way, part of what they believe in is apostasy. They mass convert into other faiths, right? And they did. The Frankists mass converted to save themselves from the Jews, the actual Torah Jews who kicked them out, into the Catholic faith. Right? This could be where all of the scandals in the Catholic faith came from. There was a lie, and this is really important to share, that when you start talking about Sabbatianism and Frankism, that this was an old fringe movement. This is absolutely untrue. You can read Israeli historian Gershom Sholom's work. Not only is it not true, the very first Jewish Supreme Court justice in America was a Frankist. He kept a picture of Eva Frank on his Supreme Court desk. That's Louis Brandeis, okay? It's right in your face what's going on, okay? They have tremendous amount of power.
And it is because what they believe in is evil is okay.
A religion like Judaism, like any of them, it's a good thing. It's a way for you to understand your relationship with God, right? But when you invert it for something like for your own, and that's the thing. It's like each of us are like, not to hit that cliche, but it's like snowflakes are so beautiful, like it's they're one of one out of like trillions, out of like the perfect conditions have to be right there to cause them to form, and like we minimize it in like pop culture as like just like closed-minded young people, but who's to say any one person's relationship with God is wrong? Even beyond human morality, not to play devil's advocate, no pun intended. Who's to say how God speaks to any one person, or what that means for that one person, or what that even means as God as an experiencer of humanity. But I guess, if we're going to live in a society with each other, we have to accept that there's just certain things you can't do to another person, to another human who is that representation of God in yourself. And Sabbatai Zevi, Jacob Frank, and their followers, I guess, felt it was their religious right to violate those things because the physical world that we live in is a representation of evil, of God. So that those laws that exist in the physical world are the devil's laws. So they could steal from their friends, they could kill, they rape their own children and wife swapped and stuff like that. And they thought this guy was the Messiah because it just made sense. They're like, well, yeah, the world is evil. The world does belong to the devil. So let's do this and we'll reveal the true nature of God. The lower we go will bring us closer to heaven. This was their belief. It was 1 million followers, right, or something like that. With Sabbatai Zevi, I guess it got to the point where the heresy got to be too much, and they brought him before the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire or something like that, and they were like, we're gonna cut your head off unless you convert to Islam. And he did that, and some of the people who were Jews are like, what the fuck, man? And the other people just followed him and converted as well. And he was like, his explanation, and it's kind of accepted this guy was like bipolar and crazy. I mean, the fuck, like, right? Incest, right? So he was like, no, you don't get it. I converted to save all Jewish people. Now you Jews can be whatever you want as well, and now you're saved. So it's like an inversion of the Christ who died to save humanity, right? This guy sold his soul to save the Jews. And eventually later on, when Jacob Frank was born and apparently accepted as the reincarnation of this guy, he raped his daughter, who he thought was the Messiah, because he wanted to have her create a body for him to be born into. And yeah, man, those were the Sabbatean Frankists who were of the Jewish community and converted into Islam and converted into Christianity. Because I guess ultimately to enact their agenda to manifest God, right, through sin, they would have to accrue power and convince a lot of people. You can't just do it on a small scale, right? So that's what they did. Apparently. Allegedly. Some of those people, after Sabbatai Zevi converted to Muslim, also converted to Muslim, and it's rumored that they created the country Republic of Turkey. And all this like subversion, all this like secret agent stuff basically eventually was used to form Israel, to form the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, and also to form the CIA, our fucking intelligence agency, which was founded by a French guy who was a Sabbatean Frankist. A lot of the French are these Sabbatean Frankists. And if you wanted to use a synonym for Sabbatean Frankism, I guess a synonym that a normie would understand for Sabbatean Frankism would literally be devil worship, like satanic blood sacrifice, stuff like that. You see, like Judaism believes that there's a certain time that God's going to come back and establish the third temple, because it was destroyed right after Jesus was crucified, and when Muhammad established Islam and basically the whole Ottoman Empire, all that other stuff, they built the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem because they thought that was the third temple. Well, Jews don't agree that that's the third temple. They think eventually it will be destroyed by their savior so that the third temple can be rebuilt and the Messianic age will come to pass. And that means different things for the different religions, but basically that's the last days. It's the end of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and the beginning of God's kingdom on earth or whatever. But the thing about the Frankists is they want to accelerate that because the Frankists are purely material beings, right? It's more physical than spiritual, and they want paradise now while they're alive. That's why they've kind of had their foot on the gas since the inception of Israel. So we had the Khazarians, right? And the Sabbatean Frankists, infiltrators into the Jewish faith. Also, the high priest of Jewish faith taking bribes from leaders of countries throughout time to basically make scapegoats of the Jews, and create anti-Semitism. So the Khazarians, the Frankists, and even the high priests of Judaism themselves were partaking in the creation of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic tropes for their own gain and for their own reasons. I guess two more things before we get into some real news. The Khazarians and the Frankists eventually evolve into the communist Bolsheviks. And this is a time where you have all these revolutions throughout Europe that involve the Jews, right? Marxism and communism comes from Karl Marx, who was a Jew, and he wrote a lot of crazy shit about it, viewing himself as a demon and all this other stuff. He was a Frankist, surprise, surprise. Sigmund Freud was a Frankist, defended rapists, right? Communist Bolsheviks did the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, killed said somewhere of like 1 million, 2 million Christians. This isn't ever really talked about. I had just seen a video. I watch so many videos back to back sometimes, and I'm at work, so I can't record all the clips or get which ones. But basically, there are people who believe like these revolutions were like, and the world wars were revenge from the Frankists for like the American Revolution, for the Russians like pushing back against the Nazis or whatever. Well, World War II was after the Bolsheviks, right? But there's even claims that Hitler was funded by the Rothschild families, like the Frankists, basically the Khazarians, the communist Bolsheviks, whatever you want to say they are. Like, they eventually became Zionists. They were all secular. They didn't really believe in the Jewish faith. That's the thing. They didn't believe in the spirituality of man. They just wanted the land where they were supposedly came from. They had that I've demonstrated. The Khazarians had no genetic ties. They're from Russia. They didn't come, and they're even beyond that. What's further kind of not talked about, because the Russians don't like being considered Jews, and the Jews don't like being reminded that they're not Jews. Basically is that like the Khazarians are thought to be Mongolians, the Huns, a sect that's similar to the Mongolians or something like that. And that's why you have like this clown Lex Friedman, who is a Jewish Ukrainian, totally in support of the Ukrainian war, totally support of Israel's right to defend himself. If you go to his Twitter, his X, you search Genghis Khan, there's 1,000 posts that he fucking loves Genghis Khan. He talks about him all the time. If you search the term genocide, there's not a single fucking post there. And this guy was instrumental in spreading information or disinformation about the Ukraine and Gaza war, right? War on the Gaza part, quotations. So the Zionists, communist atheists who believe that the Bible grants them right to Palestine, and what they want is to establish the Jewish empire, right? They had help with the Jewish mob, which I don't know if a lot of people really think about that much, because we're always thinking about the Mexican cartels, the Italian mafia, right? Like, there's all these shows and movies about them. Not too much about the Jewish mob. The Jewish mob funded the Haganah, which was like one of the small terrorist organizations that was being established in Israel as like Israel's army. When the first like Zionists were trying to settle Israel. This is like the late 1800s, early 1900s. And this continued all the way like up until World War II, right? Because like I guess like the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, he and his group wanted to buy the land from the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire apparently said, no, the only way you can get this land is through blood. Or the only way you could pay for this land was with blood. And, you know, they went through with it, man. The Ottoman Empire fell after World War I. And when World War II came, the Jews were the scapegoat there again. And it just so happens that all the Jews in Europe who were anti-Zionists, the Jews who felt like Palestine didn't belong to them because their home was wherever they lived, in Crimea, in Hungary, in Poland, all those Jews were rounded up in the Holocaust. That would be another anti-Semitic trope, right? That it was 6 million? Or just saying that it wasn't 6 million, or that the anti-Semitic trope was saying that it didn't happen at all. But it's even anti-Semitic to say that it wasn't 6 million. So, well, what we do know is that there were a lot of anti-Zionists before the Holocaust, and after the Holocaust, the world's Jewry is 90% Ashkenazi, which are Khazarians. I could play one clip about the Jewish mob from this guy, Jason Giorgiani, CIA scumbag. I just talked about Jason Giorgiani in the last episode, and I said he didn't seem trustworthy to me. He's now, in this conversation I saw him have with Danny Jones, a CIA scumbag. But that doesn't mean that the CIA doesn't give you some truth with lies. Here's that.
Folks, we have a Jewish mafia in this country. Okay? Like, have you seen Godfather? The character that was called Hyman Roth in Godfather. Remember that? The Jewish mobster who's very close to the Corleone family and did business with them. That guy who's portrayed as, Hyman Roth in Godfather is actually Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky, he was from Eastern Europe originally, but he was a New York mobster who was in the casino business and had a lot of developments in Las Vegas and then also in Miami.
Cuba, right?
He was involved with, the Corleones and elements of the CIA in trying to bring about regime change in Cuba because he had lost casino assets in Cuba.
Right.
And wanted to, change the regime so that he could open up Cuba economically again, right? Anyway, Meyer Lansky is a New York Jewish mobster with an extensive crime syndicate, okay, with many tendrils. And he used to like to recruit smart Jews from Brooklyn. Jeffrey Epstein's a Coney Island kid. He's a smart Jew from Brooklyn, all right? And when he got involved in the late 1970s, Meyer Lansky was still alive and still recruiting. He died in 83, I believe.
So, Zionists, what do they want, huh? Let's play some real news for you. Let's get away from the conspiracies and play some real news for you, and then we can get to what the Zionists want.
That's why the United States was the very first nation to recognize the State of Israel 65 years ago. That's why the Star of David and the Stars and Stripes fly together today. And that is why I'm confident in declaring that our alliance is eternal. It is forever.
Israel is one of our, if not our greatest ally in the world. And I'm so proud of what happened today. I've been to Israel twice as Attorney General, and Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
All right, but as
As a free and democratic society that abides by the rule of law, Israel is truly our greatest ally in the Middle East.
And he loves Israel too.
It's true.
2 seconds. Just 2 seconds. 6 years ago, I was up here, and I said, "This is our first Jewish president."
It's true. I always say America is Israel's indispensable and by far the best ally. But I want to tell you, I don't think you have a better ally in the world than Israel. Because
now I met Alan Dershowitz, and he said the legal thing about 4 more years, and I said, Alan, I agree with you, so we can do it. Think about it.
Alan's here someplace. Where's Alan?
Alan is here, or he had a flight? Alan is here? Think about it.
Thank you.
Maybe I will be the first one who told you, or second. Yeah.
She said, "Think about it. I'll give you another 250." But
I will give.
But her.
אני דורש מממשלות המערב לעשות את מה שנדרש כדי להילחם באנטישמיות ולתת את הביטחון הדרוש, את ההבטחה הדרושה לקהילות היהודיות בעולם. וכדאי שיקשיבו לאזהרות שלנו. אני דורש מהם פעולה עכשיו.
Make the case, because I don't want to have you be able to get past this. You say Israel is not an ally. That is not an opinion that people hear a lot. Why is that?
Look, all I'm saying is Israel has at every turn, and look, again, when I say Israel, I'm talking about the government of Israel. I'm not talking about the people there. And I'm specifically talking about Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party, who have been in control for most of this time, for most of my lifetime. Yeah, and right, most of the 21st century. And so when I say they have been constantly pushing America toward more aggressive policies, toward getting in more fights. And just like I always say, if you went out to the bar every single night with your friend, and every night your friend's trying to convince you to get into a fight, and while you're beating a lot of people up, you're also taking a lot of wounds, and you're going to jail, and you're getting in trouble, you got to stop hanging out with that friend. And so I think that my position, I don't believe in wars of aggression and wars of choice. I don't believe in sanctions. I don't believe in that. We should be friends with Israel. We should trade with Israel and have a good relationship with them. But you know what? I also don't believe in welfare, and they shouldn't get another dime of U.S. taxpayer money, and they should not.
So
hold on. Their lobby should register as a foreign
That's a good
agent,
segue. Finish that.
And they should stop blackmailing our politicians.
Got it. So back to Josh.
So the Jewish mob, the black nobility, the royalty, the Rothschilds, these communist Bolsheviks formed the Zionists. And what I'll put forth to you is that the Zionists create the reality of conspiracy theories, create the reality of anti-Semitism, to say that anti-Semitism is on the rise because it's part of their agenda. These infiltrators extending into the different realms of politics and also religion, the different religions, the media, it get it's not just the Jews. They're part of a power structure. They're a tool for the construct. They get the job done, but they also are the culprit and the scapegoat. So they get left holding the bag, right? It's all purposeful. It's because in Jewish eschatology, which is their belief of the end times or whatever, right? The Jews must return to Israel for their Messiah to reveal himself and for the third temple to be built. For the third temple to be built, they have to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which would I mean, after allegedly committing all these false flag attacks, blaming Muslims for it for like 30, 40, 50 years. Muslims and Arabs, right? And then to, say that like it's terrorist and there's Muslim terrorists and Islam is rising, like it's manufactured, it's fake, and you could see why it breeds like discontent in the Middle East. I said that Israel's central or like secret intelligence agencies or intelligence agencies in general helped establish ours, and they also were established around the same time that UFOs were becoming like mainstream news in the media. Like 1947, 1948, the CIA is established, the Mossad is established, Israel is established. The Mossad kind of before Israel, right? Because they already had like their armies and terrorist organizations working to form Israel and pressure the nations to form Israel. And yeah, man. When you tie into what we're talking about in the last episode, which I got when I showed you the clip of the lights, the orbs that I saw, I said northeast, but I think I meant northwest. It just makes you wonder how much, like, it makes you wonder, but it's also like what I'm basing the show kind of on is like how all of these different things are interlinked so intricately and purposefully that it's like once you start to pick up a few of the pieces, like the whole plate of spaghetti comes tumbling down, and that's like the craziest expression I've ever just used on the fly. But that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, it's anti-Semitism may be actually real and actually on the rise, but it's because the Zionists wanted it that way and made it work that way through their actions and intent.
And it's almost as though the Israelis want us to see it and want us to hate them. Right? You can see all over the world, popular opinion is turning against Israel. You have these popular protests all around the world protesting what is happening in Palestine. If they really want to do this, right, there are actually much more effective ways of doing this. For example, you could just poison their water. Or you could poison the air so that everyone in Gaza gets a fast cancer, right? We have the technology to do this. So Israel could do it this secretly and no one would talk about it. And in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, the population of Gaza would all be gone. It would be a very secret, right? Instead, they choose to do this in front of the world. And my argument to you is that this is intentional. They want the world to hate them. Because by doing this, they create the ultimate taboo, right? We find this disgusting and contemptuous, so the entire world will unite against Israel. But guess what? That's what their religion wants. In the extreme form of Jewish eschatology, or their religion, they believe that at the end of the world, Israel will fight the entire world and God will help Israel triumph in the end. So what's really happening in Gaza is that there are extremists within the Israel government who want to accelerate the process of the end of the world where Israel will face the world. And if you think about it, The entire idea of this ritual sacrifice is to unite the Israeli population. And what's extremely disturbing and horrifying about it is that this works.
So, what do they want, right? What is the end game of all of this mayhem, murder, destruction, and like really black magic, right? What's the purpose of it? And I've heard of it twice. I think I heard Ian Carroll talk about it. I could be completely mistaken, but I recently heard Professor Jean talk about it in his class, Predictive History. That's his channel on YouTube as well. But it's called Pax Judaica. So let's go back to the flag of Israel, right? So there's the Seal of Solomon. It's just a symbol for the Jewish people, which is, like I said, like it's the elements, the four elements making the fifth element, which is like the perfect union of all five, and the symbol for God and spirit. And Jews believe that the Jewish extremists believe that only Jews have access and right to that divine spirit and God's kingdom. So what do those two lines represent? Those two lines represent the Nile and the Euphrates River, which is not the current borders of Israel. It's since however long they've had this flag, since probably its establishment, that has been their goal. They want to, Pax Judaica, that's their goal. They want to establish Israel as the leading power in the Middle East, and then eventually the world. And part of like these anti-Semitic conspiracies, quote unquote, that have gone back into the times of the early 1920s, late 1890s, when Zionism was being formed, is like you have like these pamphlets or books called the Elders of Zion, which outline this exact plan of world domination, right? And then you have the Federal Reserve being created in 1912 and 1913 after all the politicians, billionaires, bankers, and oil barons who were against the Federal Reserve being created died on the Titanic in April of 1912, right? So all these people who were opposed to the Federal Reserve die, and then the Federal Reserve gets approved. Which, I mean, even as a layman, if you had told me that, I would be like, okay, what the fuck? Like, I get that's like that they print money, but what is that even? But it's fucked. It's fucked, and it's part of like the plan to eventually like collapse America and give control to like the only power left standing, which I guess at that point would be Israel. And their intent is to Zionists, which are we go back are the Frankists, who don't believe that any laws on earth should be followed. They want what they want. They want it now, which is God or God's power, right? And they intend on fulfilling biblical prophecy, but at an accelerated pace, which is why they've been so fucking evil and abhorrent in their actions in Gaza, and just outwardly like stereotypical in their fucking behavior, while also being aggressive in their defense of it and their attack on anybody who calls it out. It's worrisome because what Zhang teaches about game theory is like the best way to win a game is cheat, and also the one who wants to win the game the most is the one who will win. So when you have all these things that divide and distract us as a nation and as a people, then we're focused on that, whether that be calling each other anti-Semites or Republicans and Democrats or bigots or French people or Indians or whatever the case may be. Like, we're humans ultimately, and a dark force is descending upon us under the guise of like nations and principalities. Like, they're like, it's not Jewish people, it's not Russians, it's not even particularly I would say all Israelis, even though there's something very wrong about Israel in general, that anybody would be okay living in a house that was built on the literal grave of a broken family. Like, they build houses where they bury people. And they make fucking horror movies about like that being like scary as fuck, and that's just like the reality for Israel. So, you know, I would say that in spite of how dark things look, like, it's always darkest before the dawn. And the thing that kind of like stirred in me about God, even like without the religion aspect of it, was like a Exorcist movie I had seen a long time ago. I don't know if it was The Last Rite with Anthony Hopkins or something like that. But like, it's one of those cliches where the priest is losing faith and he can't do the exorcism, but then he has this epiphany at the end. He's like, no, I actually realized I do believe in God. And the possessed one was like, why? He was like, because the devil exists. And so like the amount of success that evil has in this world and how unbelievable it is should allot for you to just see the bare nakedness of God's glory, of the goodness of the creation that goes beyond any religion or any one group of people, that has allowed us to have life, be here for each other, experience love, be light, see the darkness, and still choose the right thing. So with that, I say Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, unironically, Happy Holidays, Merry Christmas. I'll see y'all after a break. And this has been the news tonight. Thank you.
If he hears me, he'll knock all day. I would try, and here I have to stay. I done no harm, I keep to myself.